Welcome, this is Raul Lowry Contreras, and this is the Contreras Report International Edition. We're going to talk about two things today. Item number one is a shooting war that is going on ground I have actually walked on more than once. That's why I'm so interested in this war. It's 7,000 miles from where I sit. Kim Kardashian is so interested in this war that she has given $1 million to the losing side. If Kim Kardashian gives cash, I give information. The second item will be about Mexico. Mexico's President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, the ultimate socialist, is being challenged by private investors as to whether or not Mexico wants foreign investments. Ignacio Sanchez Galan, chairman of the Spanish energy investor that has invested billions of dollars in Mexico, is challenging President Lopez Obrador's active policies of ending private energy generation in an effort to save failed federal monopolies of electricity generation, distribution, and of oil. Item number one, the combat continues. People are dying. Villages and towns are being liberated. Picture in your mind Paris being liberated from the Nazis in World War II. That's what's going on. Despite two Russian negotiated ceasefires in recent days, cannon, armored vehicles, and tanks are still shooting and maneuvering between Azerbaijani and Armenian forces. One thing is clear, Armenian forces are losing the day-to-day combat. They are even resorting to shooting Scud missiles, unguided missiles, hundreds of kilometers away from the combat zones into Azerbaijan's second largest city, Ganja. Civilians nowhere near military facilities are killed. This has been observed by not Azerbaijanis, but by foreign journalists. Scud missiles are generally aimed, but unlike superior American-designed missiles that can locate and hit targets within meters of the target, Scuds are essentially just aimed, and distance is determined by the amount of fuel they carry. Azerbaijan reports 63 civilian deaths, including 7 infants and children, and over 290 civilian wounded. Armenians claim 40 civilians killed. Support for Armenia is slim, very slim internationally. Even its main ally, Russia, is being careful not to antagonize Azerbaijan. Today's Azerbaijan military is not a roughly cobbled together group of individual militias as in the war with Armenia in 1992-94. They were more interested in toppling the Baku government of the day than in winning back territory lost to Armenian and Russian soldiers. Azerbaijan has an army and it is well equipped. In September, Armenian forces claimed to have destroyed hundreds of Azerbaijani army tanks, armored personnel carriers, and trucks. That was not true. The claims were made by propaganda officers in a military information office of the Armenian army hundreds of kilometers away from the combat areas in and around Nagorno-Karabakh. Their information didn't come from the fight. It came from Armenian politicians that were just trying to impress their allies in Paris, Moscow, and America. Their allies are the Armenian diaspora. There are more Armenians in the United States of America, France, and Moscow, Russia, than there are Armenians in Armenia. More on Armenia in our next broadcast, but here are 3 facts that are perfectly clear and irrefutable. Number 1, all of the territory where fighting is involved is Azerbaijan's sovereign territory. That includes the Nagorno-Karabakh region that is well inside Azerbaijan's internationally recognized borders. Number two, the claim that Nagorno-Karabakh is totally 100% populated by ethnic Armenians is a bogus claim, because it has been a shared territory, shared by Azerbaijanis and Armenians since the area was ruled by Imperial Russia, the 1918 Independent Republic of Azerbaijan, and the 70 years of Soviet rule, and since the independence of Azerbaijan within the sovereign boundaries of the new Republic of Azerbaijan, which declared its independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. Number three, though it might be 100% Armenian now, the Nagorno-Karabakh, that is only because the area was ethnically cleansed by force by Armenia of all of its indigenous Azerbaijani population. Around 50,000 Azerbaijanis were expelled just from Shusha, historic capital and cultural center, and surrounding areas, including the 7 areas of Azerbaijan proper that Armenia has occupied since 1994. Moreover, Armenia expelled 750,000 Azerbaijanis from those 7 completely Azerbaijani populated districts that surround the Nagorno-Karabakh. Altogether, 800,000 Azerbaijanis were forcibly displaced by Armenia. Since combat broke out on September 27th, Azerbaijani forces have liberated hundreds of villages and 4 cities from Armenia's 3-decade-long occupation. Hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijanis will now be able to return to these villages and cities alone, not counting the rest of the occupied area. This successful campaign replicates, though on a much larger scale, the success Azerbaijan has enjoyed in 3 weeks of conflict that resembles that of April 2016, when Armenians were driven out of territory they had occupied since 1992 and 93. It was my distinct pleasure to have visited one of the liberated villages 2 years ago, just a mile or so from the Iranian border. I could see Iran from where I was standing. All new houses with large lots were built by the Azerbaijani government, and half of the originally displaced refugees returned home in the first phase of repopulation, with another half returning as we speak. Long range, let's talk about the long range. This situation today fits into the long-range prognosis for the situation in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, and in Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia cannot sustain another 27 years of occupying 20% of Azerbaijan. It cannot afford to maintain an army on foreign soil, and it cannot even defend itself today, much less in future years. Armenia's population, especially in the 18 to 40-year-old age group, the military age group, has grown smaller every year. So much so that the Armenian president before this one signed into law a doubling of required conscription into the Armenian army from 18 months to 36 months. University deferments from conscription were limited. Essentially, if an Armenian soldier dies or is wounded, he is hard to replace. And while Armenian mobility is on Russian-supplied tread and wheeled vehicles, armed Azerbaijani unmanned drones and guided drones have upped the combat ante in the field, and Armenian mobility has been limited to the point that their armored units can't operate as units. Armenia's economy depends on Russia and the millions of Armenians who have abandoned Armenia for California, Paris, and Moscow, Russia. Places that produce more jobs in a month than all of Armenia does in a year or 2. The Russian army has 2 bases in Armenia that pump millions of rubles into the Armenian economy. Russian air defense forces guard Armenia's airspace. Russian border forces, that's Russian border guards, guard and man Armenia's border and ports of entry. So far, 2 ceasefires have been announced. Nevertheless, the fighting continued. Russia does not, at this time, seem very anxious to get involved much more than it is, that is, talking to the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan and hoping the shooting stops. France, on the other hand, is siding with Armenia and even supplying some arms to the Armenians. France has been a member of the three-nation OSCE group that has allegedly been trying to resolve the 27-year-long occupation of Azerbaijani territory. France, once again, let me repeat, is sending arms to Armenia, as is Russia. Russia shipped 500 tons of arms and ammunition to Armenia by air through Iran in July after the 5-day combat of July. Reports suggest that arms are being shipped to Armenia from Russia and France disguised as humanitarian aid on board civilian airplanes. Also, the Armenia Fund, which is funded by Armenian diaspora people in the U.S. and which has also received $1 million from Kim Kardashian, has sent several airplanes via Qatar Airways to Yerevan, the capital of Armenia. Reports suggest that some weapons could have been among that, quote, humanitarian aid, unquote. Would not be the first time that has occurred. Okay. From Armenia and Azerbaijan, we're going back to Mexico. President Lopez Obrador's plan to end private electricity generation and private participation in government oil activities of the national oil company Pemex is in the courts. Dozens, if not hundreds of thousands of private companies and investors have filed amparos, injunctions against the government's efforts to shut down private electricity generation and new gas stations by private companies that compete directly with Pemex gas stations. Lopez Obrador initiated the shutdown of private firms last May. In June, the Mexican Supreme Court ruled that Lopez Obrador's plan could not proceed because it violated constitutional protections of competition. The Supreme Court judge who wrote the opinion was clear. The government could not proceed. Lopez Obrador, however, is president. He doesn't care if the court lines up against him and his squashing of private investment in energy because, he says, there is a constitutional amendment that can be passed allowing him to do his program. In other words, with that statement, he admits that what he is doing is unconstitutional. That, however, that unconstitutionality, however, is an open question. In Mexico, like the United States, a constitutional amendment is hard to achieve. The two houses of the Mexican Congress must pass an amendment with a supermajority, 2/3 of those present. And then it must be submitted, the amendment must be submitted to the states of Mexico, all 31 of them, and a majority of the 31, 16, must approve the amendment. This could take years. Lopez Obrador has 4 years left in his one and only term as president. So private investors have to be on the lookout and pay attention to what's going on in Mexico. Will the courts help them? Will the courts stand in the president's way? Very possibly they might. They've already done it once in June. They could do it again. Okay, that's a wrap-up of the affairs in Mexico at the present time that are of interest to investors. We will be back in a few days with some election news and more in-depth studies of Armenia and the war they cannot win. I'm Raul Lowry Contreras. This is the Contreras Report International Edition, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you for being there.